Northern cardinals are in the family of Cardinalidae, found in North and South America. They are also known as cardinal grosbeaks and cardinal buntings. Unlike many snowbirds, they do not head south for the winter, and you might catch a glimpse of a northern cardinal at your bird feeder in the winter. Cardinals are small, beautiful songbirds, and they have come to represent celebration, rejuvenation, hope, health, and joy. Second Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 to 3. Are we beginning to commend ourselves again? Surely we do not need, as some do, letters of recommendation to you or from you, do we? You yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts, to be known and read by all. And you show that you are a letter of Christ, prepared by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. When was the last time you received a letter in the mail? I'm not talking about one of those computer-generated letters asking you to buy life insurance. That doesn't count. And the Reader's Digest winning lottery notice that named you as a potential winner that was in your mailbox the other day, that doesn't count either. What I'm referring to is the end result of a common practice that may be going the way of the dodo bird. Many writers are saying that letter writing is close to becoming a lost art in this day of email, internet, cell phones, and texting. Many people today seldom, if ever, sit down and write actual letters anymore. It is much more efficient to shoot an email or a text. This is true. Letter writing is time-consuming. First, you have to find a pen that works. In our house, that is easier said than done. If you succeed in finding a pen that writes, then something to write on is also a problem. Writing on a paper bag or the back of a junk mail ad is considered bad form. Still, if you find suitable stationery, finding a suitable envelope may be a challenge. Why is it that when I'm looking for an envelope, I usually find one of two extremes, either a big brown bubble wrap envelope or one of those tiny envelopes that come with birthday invitations? I end up folding my missive in quarters. Then there is the issue of an address. Some people have an address book that falls constantly out of date. My suggestion is that if you're uncertain if the address is current, Google them or look them up on Canada 411. Or better yet, email them and ask for their snail mail address. But then again, if you're going to email them anyway, why bother writing a letter? Letter writing is such a time-consuming activity, and we are all so busy nowadays doing important stuff. Who has time to write a letter? You know that most of the documents of the New Testament are letters, and all of the letters of the New Testament were written to missionary congregations. The congregations of the first generation of the Christian movement did not look upon missions as one thing that they did among many other programs and activities. They saw themselves as missionary by their very nature. They were to continue the witness that had brought them to life and faith in this world. And so all the letters in the New Testament deal with the way that each of these congregations, in places like Corinth and Galatia and Ephesus, were going to continue the witness of Jesus. And this is what is going on here in Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. He is not telling them to get involved in God's mission to the world. They have no choice about that. That is why they exist. What Paul is trying to help them figure out is how that translates into their daily living, their actions and their attitudes and their decisions. And to help them understand this, Paul uses this remarkable image of a letter. Paul is saying that he doesn't need a letter of recommendation because you yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts to be known and read by all. You are a letter of Christ, he says, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on human hearts. In effect, he is saying, you Corinthians are God's letter to the world. And if Paul were living in our time, he might write us and say something similar. You people in Shakespeare, you are God's letter to the world. This is who you are. The message or witness of God starts with God. It is passed along person to person. God has used this very human process to communicate the message and call to others. The message reached to the Corinthians in the same way reaches to us, through others who have been God's letters, God's messengers to us. By the fact of your listening to this today, each one of us has a story to tell about the way God wrote that letter on our hearts. We might think about our parents who nurtured us in the faith, our Sunday school teachers who patiently taught us the stories of faith and who demonstrated God's love for us in many ways. It might have been a leader or a counselor at summer camp who made the gospel alive to you, the friends whose care began to reveal the taste of the love of God that God has for you. God has been writing you using all kinds of circumstances and people, making you into God's letter to the world. Each letter is so different, but each one of you is God's own letter, penned to the world. Darrell Gruder is a professor and theologian at Princeton Seminary. In his commentary on this text, he writes, quote, "The writing of God's letter to the world is Paul's way of describing what we are all about as a congregation. Everything we do as a church relates in some way to this fundamental task, that we be written by God as God's letter to the world. And if that letter is going to be a clear expression of God's good news, if that letter is going to be comprehensible, then we have to pay careful attention to how we write it, how we live, how we behave, how we live out this grace and love among ourselves and in the world. Are we willing to do this? Are we willing to undergo the difficult process of composition, of engraving good news indelibly on our hearts? Daniel Gruder points out that as time-consuming and difficult as the composition of a letter is meant to be sent. Have you ever written a letter and failed to send it? Maybe it got lost in a drawer, and when you finally found it again, it was too late. It wouldn't make sense to send it. Maybe it was a letter inspired by passion or love or anger, but it sat in the drawer long enough that you began to have sober second thoughts about sending it. Well, this letter that Paul is talking about is designed to be sent. Sending is essential to who we are as Christians. We do not exist as a congregation to have God's letter written on our hearts and then have that letter sit on old wooden pews and not get sent out into the world. Letters have to be sent. One of the ways to think about this is to think about what it means to raise a child into adulthood. Here is a picture of Caroline in her prom dress. It is hard to believe that she is graduating high school this year and next fall will be studying to be a nurse at Queen's University in Kingston. Karen and I have been working on writing this letter that we have called from the beginning Caroline for the last 18 years. And you know what we think? We think it is a beautiful letter. And we've had a lot of help over the years writing this letter, from extended family, friends, teachers, neighbors, people in this congregation who welcomed her into the world and loved her from the very beginning. And then the letter has written itself in many ways, out of her own personality and character. And we are very proud of how this letter has turned out. It is a very good letter. And a letter like this, a letter that you love like this, you want to clutch it tightly to your chest. You want to save it. You want to keep it. But what I'm still getting used to is the idea that the purpose in the writing of a letter all of these years is for it to be sent. For it to be sent out into the world and to be trusted to the world. And we believe that this letter has a lot to offer to the world. There is a wonderful book entitled St. George and the Dragon and the Quest for the Holy Grail by Edward Hayes. It is a whimsical tale about George, not really a saint, a man who lived at the end of the 20th century, who decided to leave his job and his family and to go on a quest. His wife wasn't too happy with him. His boss thought he had been working too hard and was perhaps suffering from burnout. But off he went, and on the first night George meets a large red dragon. The dragon decides that George's name is much too plain. The dragon says to George, "We will have to give you a proper title if you are going to go on a quest." And with a dramatic flourish, the dragon drew himself up to full height and announced in a deep voice, "I, the celestial dragon, dub thee the title St. You may have it printed on your laundry tags for your socks and underwear, and have it painted on your mailbox, hence to be known by that title to everyone." But George is taken back and says, "With all due respect, dragon, you can't do that. Only the Pope can make someone a saint." "St, my dear quester," said the dragon, "doesn't mean saint. It is the abbreviation of the four-letter word sent. You, my friend, are George, who is sent, or sent George. You have to be sent before you can be a saint. We are God's letter to the world. And what your letter says means everything. So compose it carefully. And then there is this: no matter how carefully composed, the letter has to be turned loose. It has to be sent.